Imagine sitting in your home. Boom! An ear-splitting roar resounds throughout your house. You feel an intense wave of heat come over you. You go outside to see what's going on. You then see a huge explosion enveloping your city. That was the experience of tens of thousands of Japanese after 2 atomic bombs were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima in Japan. While the use of the atomic bombs was not the easiest method, nor the most straightforward, nor the most humane method, it was by far the most effective way to end the war in the Pacific. This method included many costs, as all methods did, and these costs include the cost of life, the monetary cost, and the cost of time. In addition to these costs was the strategic advantage that came from using the atomic bombs. The effects of the bombs are seen and remembered still today. But what would have happened had the atomic bombs never been used? Let's find out. First off is the cost of life. The atomic bombs killed nearly 120,000 people directly from the initial explosions, and many more were killed indirectly from the aftermath and radiation in the wake of the bomb's destruction. Another method that was considered to defeat the Japanese in the war was codenamed Operation Downfall, which was just a massive invasion of the Japanese mainland. The generals that suggested the operation saw over 1 million US soldiers either dying or being injured in the battle, which was nearly 2 times the number of casualties that had occurred in the war thus far. To avoid this high casualty rate, President Truman opted to use the bombs instead. What is not mentioned in the History.com webpage is that millions of Japanese would have also died, many more than died from the atomic bombs, many of them being civilians that were taught to fight the American soldiers if an invasion of the mainland ever occurred. And with that said, the casualties of the atomic bomb were far less than those that could have occurred had an invasion of the mainland occurred. Next is the cost of finance. Through December 1945, the cost of the Manhattan Project, which was the project that built and designed the atomic bombs, was roughly $21.3 billion in 2020 money. This is around 34% of the money that was spent to create tanks for the US Army in the same period from 1940 to 1945. Only 10% of that funding went to actual research and development of the bombs. The rest was dedicated to building plants and making materials for the bombs. The total cost of the Pacific War is estimated to be almost $2 trillion in 2020 money, and 400,000 US casualties. Since Operation Downfall projected nearly 1 million US casualties, the expected cost of an invasion such as that can be estimated of upwards of $1 trillion. And once more, the effectiveness financially of the atomic bomb is displayed over an Operation Downfall or an invasion of the Japanese mainland. Now is the cost of time. After the second bomb was dropped, it took only 1 week for the Japanese to announce a formal surrender. To compare, the Battle of Guadalcanal, as stated by the National World War II Museum, took nearly 6 months for the US to achieve a victory, and an invasion of the Japanese mainland, such as an Operation Downfall, would have required much more time due to the Japanese refusal to surrender, as well as their training of civilians to fight US soldiers. It could have been up to a year or even more. On top of this, there was also, of course, the high projected casualties and the high monetary cost. Another idea that military leaders suggested was a naval siege of sorts to starve out the Japanese. However, success was not guaranteed, and it could take even more time than an invasion until Japan was sufficiently starved to surrender. And once again, the atomic bomb and its effectiveness was definitely the most efficient way to win the war in the Pacific. Now is the strategic advantage that the atomic bombs provided for the US military. The atomic bombs played a very large part in the amount of pressure that was on Japanese leaders to discover a solution to either ending the war or continuing to fight, and this caused a lot of infighting within the leadership. The website for the National World War II Museum again states that the bombings were so close together, time-wise, so that Japan thought that the US had many more and could bomb whenever they pleased. The threat of another bomb was actually the main driving force behind Japanese Emperor Hirohito declaring Japan's surrender. In fact, the US actually did have plans to bomb Tokyo with a third atomic bomb had Japan not surrendered so quickly. Now we will predict what could have happened had Japan not surrendered or had the atomic bombs not been used at all. The use of these bombs forever changed the world, and what could have happened is really very interesting. Here are some ideas. The US may not have risen to such a prominent and powerful position in the world so quickly due to a period of rebuilding the military as well as mourning all the lives lost. The world would have been safer and more peaceful, I would say, had the atomic bombs not been used. Another prospect is that Japan and the Japanese people would have been completely devastated by an invasion of the mainland, with many, many casualties in the tens of millions. Japan's economy, which is now one of the largest in the world, would have taken much longer to start up and to boom, or it would not have started up at all. Finally, the Cold War would have taken place a little bit later, since the US did not have as much power from not using the bombs, and the threat of the use of these bombs was not there. And possibly because of this, the bombs could have been used in the Cold War because their devastation and horror would not have been found out after being used in Japan. So to conclude, the use of the atomic bombs was not the most straightforward approach, nor was it the most humane approach, and it definitely was not the easiest approach. But it was the most effective method to defeating Japan in World War II in the Pacific Campaign. But it is undeniable that these bombs have forever changed the world, and this is due to their financial cost, the cost of life, their timely cost, as well as the strategic advantage that they provide in a war. So I urge you, how would you act if you were in President Harry Truman's shoes? Would you use the bomb, or would you risk invading Japan or taking a siege?